Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me in the locker room on this Wednesday, November 2nd. I'm Alan Locher, Emmy Award winning Pac 12 football analyst, filmmaker, New York Times bestselling author, and former USC football assistant coach Yogi Roth is here to tell us about his self help advice book for 5-star athletes and their parents titled 5-Star QB. The book is a compilation of candid, as told to interviews with more than 50 quarterbacks of their respective high school and college experiences on the field and features letters of advice and encouragement from a slew of current and former college and NFL players, coaches, and analysts. In addition, he is here to tell us about his first children's book titled Finding Free Fun, based on his own father's philosophy growing up, which he's now sharing with his own sons. It is truly my pleasure to welcome Yogi Roth to the locker room. Hey, Yogi.
What's happening, Alan? Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. I know we've been trying to do this for a while, and I became familiar with you. Just, truth be told, I'm not a huge sports person, but listening to your good friend Joe Towns, the Better podcast. I listened to the entire podcast in prepping to have Joe as a guest, and was fascinated by your whole story, all of it. And you shared a story about your grandparents that is so similar to my own upbringing, being the child of two Holocaust survivors. Would you mind sharing the story of your grandparents, Morris and Leah, and the dialogue you were introduced to as a child?
Yeah, and I want to hear yours as well. I'd be happy to. I think, like many kids, we're impacted by many people, and if we're lucky, we get to be impacted by our grandparents. For us as children, we didn't know any other way than going to my mom's parents' homes every weekend, sitting at their kitchen table and hearing them talk about their life. And I can remember very vividly as an 8-year-old, I'd sit across the table from them and I'd have this teal glass full of Crystal Club ginger ale. We didn't have ginger ale at my house. I say that because I think in critical stories, we remember the most vivid of detail.
Yeah.
And as a child, I can remember hearing about my grandfather, Morris, who at 19 years old, in his words, he was playing professional soccer in Poland. And all of a sudden, as we all know, the Holocaust began. And he came home from a match, and all of a sudden, there were train cars outside of the town that he was living in at the time. And he got taken and put on one of those train cars and eventually found himself in a concentration camp. He would go through gas chambers, not knowing if he would take a shower or if he would die. He would go through all the things that we've all heard or read about. If you just open your eyes to any form of history around the Holocaust, you hear some of these traditional stories. As the Holocaust continued, he was led out to a forest, or there would be these mass grave sites where you would be, as a Holocaust, as a prisoner, you would have to dig your own grave. He began to dig his. As he sat there, as he shared the story with me at 8, and then many times throughout my teenage life, something clicked in his mind, and he said, I'm not going to go out like this. And he took off. He got shot 8 times in his upper left shoulder. And I remember it vividly because as a child, I'd walk over to him, Alan, and I would touch and rub his shoulder. He would say, right here, young Yogi. And he played dead basically for 2 days. A woman came and found him, brought him back to her home where she would nourish him back to health. From that moment on, he joined the partisan movement, which was basically a group of individuals that would hide out during the day and save Jews at night. And he would do that for the majority of a year and a half, rose up very high into those ranks. Eventually, he began his own family. He had a wife, he had a son, Abraham, and one day when he was out working in the partisan movement, he came home, and it was in a little town called Kielce in Poland, Kielce, and it was the largest per capita massacre in Holocaust history, where rumors spread that Jews were being hid. So the townspeople turned on one another. They didn't have guns. They didn't have traditional weapons. They had things like pitchforks. They had things like farm tools. And they went in, and I saw this photo 2 years ago, which breaks my heart even reminiscing on it, where I saw the photo of where his young son, Abraham, and his then wife were both murdered. And from that point on, you can imagine what would be going through anybody's mind, let alone somebody trying to survive the Holocaust. Pause on his story. Let's cut to, because I know you're in the entertainment industry, we'll cut to my grandmother, Leah. We called her Baba. When she was 12 years old, she was coming home from school, and her teacher pulled up beside her and said, "You can't go home today." And she said, "Why? I always go home." And she said, "No, your family was just murdered. In fact, they were just axed to death." Think about that, axed to death. From that moment on, she went on the run, hiding from farmhouse to farmhouse. She would have to pretend that, of course, she wasn't Jewish, just trying to survive. One day, she snuck into a village because she saw someone that resembled a family member. It happened to be her uncle. She then witnessed his execution in front of the townspeople. She continued to be on the run, so much so that as she hid out throughout the winter in different farmhouses, she had frostbite so bad on her legs that even as she was older, she would talk about that and the struggles that she had from that. The Holocaust would eventually end, and those two would find their way to a train, and those two would meet, share their horrific stories, but also, in their words, stories of optimism, story of belief, story of, they would always say, Yogi, life is nothing without love, and found a connection. And I say all that because, one, I think, it's important to know where you came from, because those character traits were embedded in me through their words and through my interpretation of those words. And I also love how life happened for them as it happened for me. I met my wife on a plane where we randomly sat next to one another and began a beautiful life journey together. But I say all of that, like, I think to kind of put a bow on it, what I still take away the most from it was that, as my mom, who was a refugee and grew up in a refugee camp and then eventually found her ways in as a refugee to America, she would always say that her dad was continuously giving people opportunity, whether he was giving IOUs to people. When he came to America, he started a supermarket. He'd give homeless people food all the time. He eventually went bankrupt. But he was like, if I don't feed him, who will? If I don't give the guy who's disabled a job, who will? And I just love that, because no one in the world, at least in the world that recognizes the Holocaust has obviously a part of our history, would say, man, I wouldn't be mad if they were negative, pessimistic, what have you. And they weren't. They weren't. And I think, for me, that's really a part of their personality traits that I got through osmosis. I think anybody who meets me would say, man, Yogi's just uncommonly positive and
Well, I've heard you
optimistic.
describe it as, their story is your superpower.
Yeah, totally, man. I believe it. And I appreciate you asking me, because I don't get asked a lot about that. And I probably don't share it enough, but I say that because as a child, you internalize that. And even as an athlete, if a coach said we got 10 sprints after practice, I'd be like, whatever, give me 100, right? As a competitor, if you said, hey, I don't think you're good enough to play, I'd say, just give me a chance. I did that in college as a football player. I walked on, meaning you don't have a scholarship, eventually earning a scholarship to play. I think even in entertainment, I've always said, hey, just give me a chance. Let me host a show. Give me an audition. I'm not asking for a freebie, but get me in the room. And I think I really learned that from them, because I do believe, me and my siblings, we all have this little thing that's our superpower of, like, oh, you think like, you got no idea what is embedded in us. And even if that's just a story I tell myself, I love it, because I think it's a fun one to
Well,
lean on.
I do believe it. I'm really amazed. Like, your story's hitting me a lot. I didn't fully grasp as a young child what my parents went through. I knew it all along. And when Schindler's List came out, we had them do just like your grandparents, I think, right? Have the Shoah Foundation video.
Yep.
And we got them to do that. But I didn't grow up in a very large Jewish community, so I didn't really. I'll tell you a quick story. It took my nephew in 1994. My first nephew was born, and from the hospital in New Jersey, my mother went to the payphone and called the daughter of the people who risked their lives to save my mother. She was the same age as her during the war and was basically her closest friend. My mother was an only child. And it was like that moment, it was Schindler's List for me a lot, seeing the girl in the red coat, because that was my mother's age. And then, shortly after my nephew was born, and my mother, from a payphone called this woman who I've always known, but the impact of that from a hospital in New Jersey to tell that her grandchild was born was that amazing connection. But what I find fascinating about yours is that your grandparents were talking about it so early, because so many Holocaust survivors didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I remember talking to my mother about that, and she would say, like they were really proud of kind of their experience in a way where, I think there's always something in the
Survival is
Jewish
something to be
community.
proud of.
Yeah, I mean, we see the phrase, right, which is like never forget, like, and I think it was important for them to talk about it. I think that my mom would always tell stories about how her parents would wake up in the middle of the night and you hear them, having night terrors of sorts, feeling as though they're being taken again, or we can't even imagine.
We can't
Like,
imagine.
we can. I mean, I have the photo of that baby murdered. I have a photo of it. I didn't live it. I can't imagine having a baby now. Who can, watching this, coming home and seeing that and finding a way to persevere. There's nothing that, I mean, we're not trying to play the comparison game, but I don't know what else you can compare it to, right? Like it's really hard to find something in that regard. And yeah, man, I and it's important for me to share those stories with our sons, to utilize my platform when appropriate to talk about it. I mean, here we are in a lifetime or in a week where, whether it's Kanye West or whether it's Kyrie Irving, where I think it's important to talk about these stories. And I'm not saying anybody, those two individuals are terrible humans. I'm saying that like what they're doing and what they're talking about and the way that they're positioning it is not healthy for society.
No.
And
It was for me, Charlottesville, that really lit something in me, because my parents were deceased at that point. But the thought of my mother being alive and watching those people in 2019 shouting, "Jews will not," she knew, and I'm sure your family knows, anti-Semitism is all around us, but it has never been so prevalent and vocal as it was from that moment forward, I think.
yeah, well, I'll never forget it. My brother, I don't know if you know him. His name's Ravi. He'd be
I
great on
do.
the
He's been
show.
on my show. I
Oh,
love
perfect.
Robbie.
So I can remember, even go back, here we are in the political world, but, he was out when Donald Trump won the election. And I think early in that night, especially on the East Coast, if you rewind to that time, a lot of the country thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win. And he said, as the news changed, my brother, who is gay, he felt as though like vitriol was coming out of the walls. And he lives in New York City. And it was like there was a hall pass to be homophobic. And it seems like in years now, as the years have continued, there's, I don't want to say a hall pass, but like there's this opening for anti-Semitism. And I was having this dialogue with a friend last night around, okay, now we see social media, and I think there's a movement of people, saying goodbye to social media to a degree around like, man, like, is it good that the world has put a bright spotlight on all this racism that is inherently occurring in this country? Or do we like it when like Twitter didn't exist and maybe we didn't know? And I don't have an answer to that
Correct. We did
conversation.
right. Were we misguided or whatever, or just naive to it because it wasn't prevalent? But right, the man who just took over Twitter was just spewing, misinformation already, 2 days after he got on the platform about what happened to Paul Pelosi. It is really scary.
Yeah, and I think that look, it's on people like yourself and myself and others, not necessarily say, hey, we live on this side of the political line, but just hey, we live on this side of humanity. And we're going to stand for things that we think are appropriate. And when they're not, we're going to stand up for them. And not in an emotional, screaming manner, but in a way of like, hey, I want to educate. And I say that with two kids. That's really what I want to make sure that my role and my wife's role is making sure our kids feel seen and heard and also see and hear reality.
Well, we got to honor the family that saved my mother in 2012 after my mother was gone. But my sister and I went over to Holland, and I don't know if you know, Yad Vashem gives them a plaque where the engraving is, "He who saves a life saves the world." which is to me a beautiful saying
Yeah.
that we should all take to heart. Not Jews, Christians, Muslims, all of us as humanity. But I'll just tell you, like my sister even says, and I don't know, if you can really say this. We think of the family that saved my mother. It was 9 children and the parents, so 11 lives they risked for my mother and her mother. And my sister, who has 2 children, says, until you're put in that position, I don't know what I would do. I would like to believe I would do what they did, but it's a difficult thing to think about, and hopefully we will never get there. But it's something you have to think about today with everything sort of spinning around us, I feel.
Yeah, it's a really unique time in the world. I often go back to what my mom told myself, my brother Ravi, and sister right before she died 2 years ago. She said her favorite phrase is tikkun olam, which is Hebrew for repair the world or heal the world. And she felt that was her job. She often worked with abused children in drug and alcohol rehab centers. I mean, that was her life, right? To help repair the world, repair the soul, heal the world, whatever. And she would say to us, like, Yogi, to me, keep telling stories that can heal the world. So whether that's a story about someone who's gone through a hardship, or that's a story about somebody making a great play, like whatever it is, make sure that is the lens you see the world through. And I love that phrase so much so it's up on my wall in my little creative space here. And it's even on my call sheet when I broadcast games at the bottom, it says tikkun olam. So it's a great reminder. And I think those little things are important for us because you're right. Like whether it's Charlottesville or Kanye or whatever the moment is, like we peak. But to me, it's really about, and great leadership is about consistency. Whether that's leadership in your world where you can shrink the change with, your relatives, your, in-laws, whatever it may be, whatever existence, all of us respectively are in, or it's a bigger platform that you may have. Like, how can you maintain a sense of consistency and integrity around education, empowerment, thought, and not just lean radically one way or the other when something radical begins to trend? And that's, I think, the world that we're in now. It's what just happened? Oh, that was shitty. Okay, excuse me. That was not great. Let me just really quick pivot to tomorrow because now there's gonna be something else that isn't great. And I think that's a tough way to live. And I see it with athletes. I see it with high school athletes all the time of they're living on this yo-yo of sorts of their emotions because one day they're great, one day they're not. One day somebody says they're amazing, one day somebody's in their DM saying they're terrible. And I just believe that as a leader, if I went towards the mentorship role that my grandparents served for me, and that I think I serve now for teenage student athletes and college student athletes, like it's a sense of consistency around style, vision, theme, philosophy, like who you want to be and what your voice is in your own life.
I think that's amazing. And I love how, and I sort of have learned it through this show. Like the show is just, I created it to cheer up people when the pandemic hit because I worked on 2 American soap operas. It started because of that. But we all just can learn from each other. You listen, your story of football or your grandparents' story or, meeting your wife. There's just so much. If we just, open your ears, can listen, can change, can enlighten us, can just, I really, when I do shows related to anti-Semitism, I say, I truly believe conversations like this can change the world because I do if people just open their hearts and minds to listen to others.
Yeah.
But,
can I share one more quick story with you?
Yeah, please.
So I can remember I referenced that story about my brother when Trump won the presidency, and I didn't know where to go, right? Like, and part of me was like upset, frustrated. How am I going to manage this? Right? I'm in a pseudo public position. I'm not, A-lister. I know that, but I have a platform. And I called my dad. And I said, I don't really know what to do here. And he said, hey, your job right now is to do 2 things. And I said, okay, what? And he recommended one, shrink the change. And I love the concept of shrinking the change, meaning like I can scream as loud as I want to the rooftops, but I'm probably not going to impact everybody in Florida or Pennsylvania or Nebraska or even on the other block from where I live here in LA. But if I can look at my community and be like, okay, I got 2 boys. We have this family unit. Can we shrink the change around our friend group and say, hey, let's have some conversation, which was the second part. Shrink your change and then start to have dialogue. Don't just live in your world where everybody believes what you believe, but really shrink your change and start there and make sure that your kids understand integrity. Like if you ask my oldest son, what's the rule in the house? He'd say, don't cheat, don't lie, live with integrity, period. Right? So can we be really clear with that in our small circle? And then let's tap into some other ones where maybe we don't think we agree with them on the surface. So let's just have a cup of coffee. And I love that, especially being a guy that gets to live on college campuses, which is just beautiful, Alan. Like it's beautiful to go to Stanford, to Cal, to Eugene, to Oregon State, to Washington State, to ASU, wherever in the Pac-12 on the West Coast. Be able to drop in and just walk around campus and tap someone on the shoulder and say, hey, what do you think about this? And I think those two things are really healthy because we can get into our own world and it's everybody agrees with us and everybody else is wrong. And that's not helping. That's not helping.
You need, book clubs have been around for a very long time. You need to start a shrink the change movement, Yogi.
Yeah.
I will join whatever movement, but that really is powerful because, and I've heard other people say, and you said it earlier, we are on a different side politically, but in terms of it's a shrinking the change, having those conversations with people you don't agree with, I think is really part of how we can make a difference.
Yeah, well, because what's the option, right, man? Like talk smack behind everybody else's back. Like I've got a bunch of friends and colleagues, and we've all seen it, right, throughout the pandemic, what have you, the last 4-6 years of, wow, I didn't know that person was this. I didn't know this person believed in that. And you're like, man, they're out. That's one way to do it. We've all done that. And there's the other way of like, hey, just kind of curious, like, what made you say this about abortion? What made you say this about politics? Like whatever your issue is. And then you could say, hey, I don't really want to move forward with this relationship. But I think it's always worthy of like, hey, like, let me hear you out. Let me ask. I really believe the greatest performers, the greatest quarterbacks, the greatest leaders have one common trait, which is they're seekers. They seek, they ask questions, they wonder why, they listen like their life depends on it. Right? You're in the acting world, man. You've lived entertainment for a long time. The greatest actors, and every acting class I've taken, is you have to listen. I say as a broadcaster, listen like your life depends on it, to my partner on the headset, to the fans, to the nonverbals of the players if they're injured or if they're excited or if they're nervous. Like you have to listen, bro. Like if you just want to shut out and hear yourself, well, you're really not going to grow. And I'm not here to preach. Like I don't have all the answers, but I do believe that seeking is a trait that is common in high achievers, regardless of whatever vertical you may be achieving in.
I love that. I could talk to you for hours, but I want to. Where did the love of sports begin for you?
Oh, that's easy. Like in my small town in Pennsylvania, 2,500 people, no stoplights. Wasn't a lot going on, Alan, other than me and my 3 best friends. We'd wake up every morning, meet on the same corner, and play whatever it was. And when we would play there before the game would begin, if it was basketball, it would be, I'm Barkley, I'm Bird, I'm Magic, right? I'm Jordan. If it was tennis, it was, I'm Chang, I'm Edberg, I'm Courier, I'm Agassi. If it was football, I'm Rice, I'm Montana, I'm Young, I'm Taylor. Like whatever it was, like we were going to be pros. And in our little town that could, right, we just believed it. We just believed it. I was going to be a pro athlete forever. And then when I learned about college, of course I was going to play in front of 80,000 people in person and millions on television. Now, as I got older, it was very apparent that nobody else really agreed with that, right? Including whether it was my parents or whether it was our coaches in my community, because it was all about probably safety. Hey, go play at a smaller school. You know you will play there. Go play at the school that's offering you some scholarship money. And I was just like, I couldn't sleep well if I didn't take a swing at the University of Pittsburgh to play teams like Notre Dame, to play teams like Miami, to play teams like Syracuse, to play Boston College. I just felt like I needed to take a shot. And I think that's been a DNA trait for me my whole life. So I was obsessed and in love. I think as I went on in my career, and that's why I'm really proud of the book 5-Star QB, is that I did not have a healthy relationship with my sport. I lost the joy, or as we write about in our book, my wonderment, the wonder switch was turned off. That was once there as a child or even as a high schooler. When I got to college, it became about the grind and proving people wrong versus proving myself right, and the joy from performing. And I wasn't a big recruit. So as I've been in sport for the last 20 years now as a professional, I see it on a big stage. And man, like most of these guys don't recognize their wonder switch has been turned off. And if they do, then the joy, man, goes through the roof. And the guys that usually play the best are also the ones having the most enjoyable experience, having the most fun, seeking those moments out with their teammates within their collective sideline. But for me, man, I was in from jump.
All sports, though, you and your friends were playing. How did you determine, or when did you realize you had the talent in football?
Freshman year, I was 14 years old. I was starting on varsity in our tiny little town, and I was having some success. And I believe on a questionnaire that high school coaches send out to colleges, there was a typo. They put senior instead of freshman. So I started to get all these letters: Harvard, Princeton, Pittsburgh, Hawaii, North Carolina. Like I vividly remember coming home being like, "Oh my God." And that's where it really flipped for me. And I remember talking to a coach at Princeton, and at the time, like of Ivy League was a big goal of mine. I was always a high achiever academically, and he called and he said, "Yogi, we like you on film. Like we're interested in you coming to play. What do you think?" And I said, "Hey, I'm only 14." And he goes, "Oh my God, we thought you were a senior." And that's where I was like, "Oh, if they're calling me now, then I can go do this." And that's where I transitioned from like basketball, baseball were leaders in the clubhouse for me, because I always just felt like basketball was my true love. Baseball, size-wise, I thought I could play in the major leagues just because I knew where I stood at 5'11" and a $180 or so. But once I got those calls, I was like, "Oh my God, I can go to college for free." Like, and I always love, and I still do, I love when the lights turn on. And in football, the most amount of people come to games. And I've always felt more comfortable with the bigger the crowd. Like, you want to make me nervous? Put me in front of 10 people. You want to make me comfortable? Put me in front of 100,000 live screaming fans. And you got to go, no takebacks. I'm in. So that was football for me. And once I saw that as an opportunity, I became obsessed.
I love that. I love that. You did a TED Talk where you shared your grandparents' story, but you also talk about how football and sports changed your life. How would you put that into words?
I think sport continues to change my life every day now, especially with children and being a youth coach or being around youth sports. And then even as a broadcaster, I'm approaching 20 years calling games from the 50, and it used to be intimidating because you're being asked to say like 300 smart things in 15 seconds or less over the course of 3.5 hours. Just that on a piece of paper freaks me out thinking about it today. But it's become a craft that I'm really enjoy, that I'm really proud of, that I get to call a profession. But yeah, man, it's a hard question because I think I'm always evolving in sport, and my love for it is constantly changing. I look at this year, it's the most fun I've ever had. It's my 8th or 9th year with the same TV crew, who are like family to me. My kids know them. My wife is tight with them. Our families know each other. It's a different experience than when I was 25 coaching at USC, living in LA, living that life and having a blast because we never lost a game. But that was a beautiful experience because I got Pete Carroll to really mentor me and teach me. Pete wrote the foreword to this new book that we just did, 5-Star QB. And what I love is that he wrote a foreword to a different book I wrote. And what he wrote is totally different from when I was 26 to 41. And it's cool to see the evolution of a ball in my life, as well as the people that have introduced me to different elements of sport.
Well, he's watched you grow completely.
Yeah, well, I always say Pete took the clay that my parents created and really at a young age molded it. He was very clear when I was 22 and I started to work for him. Even at 19, I met him and he said, "What do you want to do in life?" And I said, "Coach, I just want to impact the world in a really cool way." And his response was so like it still cuts me. He said, "Yogi, then Don't worry about climbing the ladder of success rung by rung. Create value, and you'll start to leapfrog the competition. Meaning, my job when I got to SC at 22 was to staple practice scripts. I still to this day, Alan, feel as though I'm the best stapler of practice scripts on planet Earth, because I did 18 every Tuesday and Wednesday, and it was upper left corner, it was perfectly aligned, and the paper was great, and I became obsessed with it. And then when I had chances to leave and coach elsewhere, Pete would bring me back. And that's where I started to understand the idea of creating value in your relationships, value in your work ethic, value in your productivity. Same thing as a broadcaster. I didn't win the Heisman Trophy, but I hope that if a fan or an executive watched the game, they would feel, wow, like Yogi celebrates the game and he coaches me without making me feel like I don't know what I'm talking about. Like, I hope I elevate their viewing experience.
Well, it's sort of that work ethic. I even describe it, having worked my entire career in public relations, that if somebody, we used to, fold press releases and stuff them into envelopes, or, when I worked at Disney, I had to put movie press kits together. At 55, I'll still do that. There's no issue. Like, it doesn't matter what age. It's sort of getting that job done if you want to do that job well. Talking about Pete, I love what you said about your parents molded you. Because you are a mentor now, but how, Pete could have said something completely different that could have changed the course of your life. And I know you give, all this advice in the book, but how important the power of those people that, you're putting your children with, they have such a, impact as coaches and mentors that hopefully go the right way, like Pete did for you. But I don't think it's always the case.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think part of sports experience is probably having coaches that maybe you don't align with as a player or a parent. I think part of sport experience is learning how to manage different personalities, right? Everybody isn't going to be the quarterback who's the All-American boy, right? Like, and every quarterback who is that is going to have to deal with somebody from a different part of the world. I've seen, let's just be very stereotypical here, I've seen like the rich white quarterback from Orange County get thrust into a group of players who have somebody from South Florida, somebody from Philly, somebody from LA, somebody from East LA, somebody from Nebraska. And that's why I love football, I think, the most out of all, because it takes 11 players on every snap to execute. Doesn't matter where you come from. I look at my locker at Pitt, and I sat next to Antonio Bryant from South Florida, who spoke 4 or 5 different languages. And I also sat next to Chris Wilson, who was a tight end from Philly, like, whose parents were both educators. And here I am, the walk-on whose mom is a refugee and whose dad, never pushed a sport on him. Like, it's just beautiful when you think of what sport can do. I firmly believe in the following phrase, which is, we all speak ball. And I firmly believe that there's power in play. I firmly believe that play therapy will help anyone. It helped me when I got dumped by my 5th grade girlfriend, Tara Steele. It still helps me now when I'm managing a 2 and a 7-year-old, right, as a parent. Now, the tools moving forward, I think it's vital. And I will now begin to ask every coach who coaches our kids, I will say, what do you believe is your role? And what skills are you front loading within this environment? Whether it is a Little League coach for a 5-year-old, or whether it's his coach when he's in high school, or if he's lucky enough to compete in fencing or basketball or whatever in college or beyond. And I hope that he'll begin to ask those questions, because I think it's really important, because I don't think many coaches get asked that question. You might say, okay, how? Well, when I've talked to Coach Carroll at the Seahawks, and he brings in new coaches to his program in the National Football League, the highest level in football, and one might argue the highest level in sport in terms of the amount of coaches that have to come together. He'll ask guys who've coached for 20 years, hey, let's take me through your coaching philosophy. And over 90% of everyone say, I don't really have one. I've never really thought about it. But I think part of what has made Pete great is not just winning. He's transformed coaching by having these types of conversations. So now younger coaches are thinking this way if they track Pete and he becomes a mentor to them, even from afar. Youth coaches, there's no chance, because a lot of times they're just volunteering because no other parent did. But I think it's even more important then, because I've seen the dark side of youth sports. I've seen brilliance in youth sports just in my own kids' 3 years of being in them. Right. And part of me as an assistant, I've been the dark side, and I hope I've been the light. So I just think it's really important for those mentoring the next generation of athlete is to be very crystallized on that thought, because by 11, most athletes experience burnout, lack of joy, and walk away. And what is sport? Sport is not getting you a scholarship. Sport is teaching you accountability, teamwork, integrity, connectivity, listening skills, seeking skills. Like, there are so many things that are inherently there in sport, just on how the game goes. You don't even have to insert in a drill. You just have to say, go play.
You're saying by 11 years old, they have burnout today?
That's what every stat would tell you.
Wow.
Is that majority of young athletes will quit by 11. I got an email this morning from a parent who said, my kid is on the radar to be one of the top players in America. So we're deciding which junior high we're going to go to. We're deciding which camp we should go to. We're deciding which personal trainer we should go to. What they didn't say is we're deciding if we're going to play 3 or 4 sports. What they didn't say is, like, we're making sure we're taking a 6-week break every year to make sure our kid can recharge. All things that I just believe are really valuable. And it's hard. And it's why we wrote 5-Star QB.
I was going to ask you to tell me why,
Well, we wrote it for 3 reasons, really. The last one we didn't realize till the book came out, as you see the cover there.
I love the cover.
Yeah. Well, the cover is really purposeful. So we wrote it because I wanted the people on the cover to have a voice. All of those quarterbacks you see, there's 54 or 53 on the front and back cover. We didn't have Jimmy Clausen's the one picture we don't have on, who's in the book, because we didn't have the rights to his photo to take you inside the weeds there. But we put all their faces on them because often when a quarterback is committed to, call it Miami, USC, Florida State, Nebraska, Ohio State, whatever, the fan base will say, whoa, they'll Google him. They'll look at his social media profile. They'll look at his highlights, and they'll look at his ranking in some order. They won't look at his soul. They won't look at his face. They might not even tell you what he looks like. And then if they don't play well, all they see is an arm. All they see are highlights. They don't see a human. When they DM them, I can't believe you threw 2 interceptions. Or, and I'm going to be raw here on purpose, you should kill yourself, which happens every weekend in college football. They don't see the human. So I wanted, and Joey Roberts and I, the co-author in this book, we wanted this cover to be of faces of humans. We were super intentional about that. And the faces when they were 17. Okay. It's very important that I share that, because it was as critical to this book as anything else. Within that, we wanted to hear their voices. So Joey and I give our advice throughout every chapter in the book. But you'll also hear from 54 quarterbacks who've been through visit to a college, been through a summer camp, been through transferring, been through getting paid, been through dealing with the opposite sex on college campuses, been through their own mental health journeys. They've been through it. And then we layered in advice from coaches to say, hey, let me help you out here as Pete Carroll or as Chip Kelly or as Lincoln Riley or as Ryan Day. I'm talking about the head coaches at UCLA, USC, Ohio State, Stanford. 40 ambassadors of the game offered their advice. So this whole book is a tribe of mentors. And who's it for? It's for the athlete going through it, because you can't Google how to be a recruit or how to be a walk-on, and for the mom and dad. You can't Google how to be the parent of an elite athlete, an athlete that you think is elite, an average. You can't Google it. So we even have a whole chapter based on parenting where I talk to the parents, and you hear from the parents of the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, Bryce Young, his father, Craig, or the number 2 in the Heisman last year, CJ Stroud, his mother, Kimberly, or Christian McCaffrey, who's now in the 49ers, his mom, Lisa, whose husband won a Super Bowl in the NFL. All of her kids have played major college football, and most of them have played in the NFL or are coaching. And I thought it was just really important to offer up to parents and players some tools. And then the third audience is really the fan, because now you see and hear from the player that you lit up. And I hope that it just gives you pause. I'm going to pull my phone in every time you're about to hit send on that DM.
On that nasty DM.
Yeah, because I mean, I get them all the time too. After every game I broadcast every weekend, somebody says, "You're terrible, you should quit," whatever. And once a month, I'll respond to somebody and I'll be like, "Hey, you don't even know me." And what's the response back? "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I was drunk. I was passionate. I was watching the game. I got caught up." Well, I can handle it because I could care less. But when you're 19, 20, 21, when those messages come in tens and 20s and hundreds and thousands, there's a story in this book from Bo Nix, who's the starting quarterback at Oregon, playing at an All-American level right now. He says when he went to Auburn on his visit, place where his father played college football, he's a legacy player. He started in his first game as a freshman. He said they were chanting my name on my visit. They were chanting my name, hoping I would come, and I did. And then in my final season, they were chanting my name but booing me off the field. So he left. And now he's in a very healthy environment in Eugene, Oregon, leading his team. They're a top 10 team in the country right now. Thank
When
God.
you played at Pittsburgh, social media wasn't prevalent like
Didn't exist.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
I mean,
Yeah.
Facebook just started, but I remember my
Oh,
moment.
that is correct, because 20 years ago, September, I was at Pitt filming for As the World Turns. We came to your school, auditioned college students to appear on As the World Turns, and we filmed on campus and at Carnegie right there. But one of the kids I met told me about Facebook. What was it called back then?
The Facebook.
The Facebook, yes.
Yeah.
And it was to connect college students. He was the person. That is so funny. You just made me think of that. At Pittsburgh, I was told about the Facebook.
That's brilliant. I wish I had an audition, man. That would have been fun.
Yeah, were you still there, 2002?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was a sophomore.
Yeah. Oh, that's so wild. We were right outside the student commons. We came about a week earlier before we filmed, and we had a little trailer out there and did a casting session.
Of course. That's amazing.
That's wild. And you say your dad wasn't a big sports person.
Well, he was the athlete. He's the guy who started as a freshman in high school. He was an all-state wrestler.
Oh,
He
your
played
dad
everything.
was.
He played everything. But the thing that I cherish the most, like my favorite, one of my favorite stories was when I was a freshman, as I referenced earlier. I'm starting in high school and I think I'm pretty cool. And I'm getting a haircut. And the barber says, your dad started as a freshman too in high school. And he beat out a captain who went to Syracuse at linebacker. And I remember in that moment being like, oh my God, I had no idea. And in almost real time, Alan, I said, I really appreciate that, because he didn't push his career on me. I love that. I mean, I hope Zane and Makai, our two sons, ask me about playing, but I will never tell them about playing. And I say that because of my healthy experience with my own father. He was a guy that I could go to, right? He wasn't a snowplow parent, but he wasn't an over the top, you need to go do this parent. He would just offer me up opportunity and say, okay, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? I want to go to Notre Dame. I want to go to Pitt. I want to go to these summer camps. Okay, cool. How do you want to pay for it? And then I get a job. But I just loved that it wasn't pushed on me. And I don't know if that's even possible anymore because of the internet, and our kids, I'm sure, will Google their parents at some point. And my son is like, he would set up my camera if I go on television every Tuesday for the Pac-12 network. Like, he knows what dad does, but I will be very purposeful to not tell him about my career. Because as I've learned, like, kids know more than you think anyway.
Well, I think back, to, and again, I didn't play sports. My sister did, but we didn't have, during our growing up, the amount of activities that kids do have today. I mean, kids are, I do believe when you do say that, I was surprised to hear burned out at 11, but I believe that because you see just from friends and neighbors and some of the schedules that people's children have is insanity. What is like the best piece of advice you would give to a parent about letting their child explore sports, no matter which sport, just going into the world, without it being, something that the parent is trying to make them the top athlete at 5 years old?
Yeah. Well, don't do that. Listen,
But there are?
yeah.
Aren't there
Oh,
parents? Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I wrote this book and I learned about rankings for 11-year-olds, top 50 quarterbacks in California, but you got to pay $300 to get in consideration. Like, recruiting is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And I'm not here to tell any parent or any athlete what they can't do. Because I know what that felt like when everybody said you can't play in the NBA or you won't play big time college football. Like I've heard that my whole life too. So this isn't a session on that. This will be some advice based on my miss as a dad. And this is a recent miss. I was given this advice 2 years ago from a guy named Ken Black, who was the creative director at Nike for 25 years. And Ken said, Yogi, when your child shows interest, back the dump truck up and open it up and dump all the things on them. If they show interest in football, go play catch, put on a game, take them to a game. If it's baseball, get a net, get them some balls, get them a bat. If it's basketball, whatever the thing is, if it's art, if it's music, see if it sticks. And then it's your job as a parent to recognize if it doesn't. I saw it with our son. He played baseball, seemed to really like it at first. And then as it went on, he really just liked being around his buddies, which I think that's what sport should be anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But the environment that he was in his baseball team was not that. As he's gotten older, as you referenced, sport inherently become more intense or players have more passion for it. And it wasn't the right environment for him. We signed him up for back-to-back baseball seasons. Well, what did I learn in the second of those 2 back-to-back seasons? He just wants to hang out with his buddies. Yeah. So that sometimes isn't proper behavior on the practice field. It could be frustrating for his coach. So much so that we said, you know what? We didn't even really ask him. We just kind of put him in it because it was easy, if I'm going to be honest. And as we learned, it was not a healthy experience for anybody. His team, his coach, Zane, us getting into practice, trying to convince him to play, whatever. And I say that because my wife and I, it was a great moment for us to say, that's on us. Like that was our bad. We were putting him in an environment that was just kind of easy because he did it before versus, let's try some other stuff. So that's what we're doing now. He's in Taekwondo and then he's going to not do anything. And then every Sunday now, like we go do something totally different. And just to see what sticks. And I heard this beautiful analogy to parenting. It was a video posted, I think like 30 years ago, and said, your child is born inherently with 400 different personality traits on average. So for you to think like, because I play classical music, or because we go to every baseball game, because we watch the Dodgers every night, or because we watch the Lake Show, they're going to love that. You're wrong. You're just wrong. Now, putting him in that arena, you have the opportunity to find out if they love it. So the analogy is be a sheep herder. Don't tell your sheep where to eat in a specific stall per se, but put them in a field and see how they navigate that field. And if they don't love that field, call it the baseball field for us, cool. Just navigate them to another field. And if they don't love the martial arts field, okay. But hopefully they took away something from baseball. Maybe it was a team-oriented element, or maybe it is that they didn't like it. Or maybe it's Taekwondo and it's a discipline. Like maybe it's the arts and they love finger painting. I don't know. Like we're going to learn and figure it out. But
they might create a new sport because you've combined all of that.
And it might not be any sport, but they just recognize the importance of being active in their life. Like man is made to move. And I think we move through things. So I go back to play therapy. You don't have to be a great athlete, but you can love playing, and playing could be swimming, playing could be running, playing could be walking. Like as we get older, especially this generation of children, there's a ton of stuff that they're going to have to navigate. And we can't just plow it for them. We got to give them tools to manage it and navigate it. So long-winded, I would say to parents, based on our screw up, what we've learned is that the job is to expose them to as much as possible. And when they're in love with it, drop it on them. And then also be aware of that. And know that like it can't suck out the joy and the wonderment that I referenced earlier. Because if it happens, and I've seen it happen so often, when the kids get to 14, they're like, Dad, I'm out. Mom, I'm out. Or they get to college and have this offer and they went on scholarship and they're 19. They're like, man, this sucks. And they transfer. It will happen. So I think that's the gauge that I would advise or recommend. Again, I'm not the guru, but based on our experience and the research I know in sport, that's the best path that I have found as of today.
I love it. You're making me think. My colleague at work, George, is Argentinian, and he loves soccer, and he plays soccer, and he has a boy and a girl, and his young son, who's probably 5 or 7, plays soccer. But
Yeah.
he told him they were going into the city like 2 weeks ago, and I think the son thought he was going to see soccer, and they showed up at Madison Square Garden for a basketball game. And, he said his eyes just, he was introducing him to this whole new world he had not experienced. Just
Yeah.
sounded exactly to what you're, talking about.
Well, it's a beautiful opportunity, like being a parent and having the responsibility to educate, open eyes, open doors. And look, I think we also live in a world where it's like we want to give our kids everything. I don't think it's the right move, just personal opinion here, to when your kids turn 18, them look around the world and be like, well, I've done it all. I've been to a bunch of countries. I've seen everything. I've been in VIP. Like, I don't think that's necessarily the best thing. I think it's just these little kernels of paying attention to, all right, where can we drop them in? What do we glean from that? What do they glean from that? And just being connected to movement. That's why we wrote the book, Finding Free Fun. I mean, in our 2020, you started this show, and there it is on cue. What we did is my wife and I sat in our apartment at the time, and she was just pregnant with our second. And we
I
said,
love that cover.
yeah, thanks. Well, that's an image of Zane when he was 4 or 5 years old. First time he went surfing was 3. And we sat there and we're like, okay, if we're homebound, we're not going to watch TV all day, right? If we can't go to Disney World, we're not going to say that we can't do anything fun. And when I was a child, my dad, we didn't have much. So he introduced the concept of free fun, meaning you can go outside and you could roll a ball out. You can find a box. You can create a game. You can find it in LA. It's everywhere, at the beach, in the mountains. I mean, you name free fun, just walk outside and it's there. I mean, it's 72 and sunny pretty much every day of the year. And we just committed to it. And then I talked to our son, Zane, who at the time was missing kindergarten and preschool. And you know that those are like some fundamental years around word association, letters, sounds. And I found as the years went on, and now he's in 2nd grade, like reading was a challenge. And again, I go back to, I think the 2 most critical elements for children is to make sure they feel seen and heard. And confidence is the thing. I don't want to go. I don't want them to have to look for affirmation from me or I have to fawn over a coach and make sure that they say, hey, good job. You're a good kid. I don't want them to get it from, God forbid, a video game or like something like that, where they say, hey, you're the high scorer. And those things are already going to naturally happen just as human beings. So we said, well, how can we curate confidence? And I said, Zane, what do you think? Let's put this book together. And I had written a couple books already, but never a children's book. So we started to put it together. And I'd read it to him. Hey, what do you think about this version? No, that's not cool. What do you think of this version? Yeah, that's fun. And then I found this platform and a friend at Vooks, which is a beautiful platform, which animates children's books. So we wrote the book that you showed a cover of, which is a hardcover. Get it on Amazon. But you also can go to Vooks platform and watch the movie. It's basically like an 11-minute.
I didn't put that together. Got it. Wow.
Yeah, so that just released last week, and it's an animated version of the book that will eventually find its way to Alaska Airlines. They have a distribution deal with Netflix, so we'll see if our book, our animated version of this book, finds its way to those platforms. But it was really cool for him to watch.
I was just going to say, Zane his mind, he's coming to life on screen now.
Yeah, it was really cool. Like, we wrote the book 2 years ago, and because we partnered with a publishing company, it took 2 years, right? I wrote the quarterback book and I finished it on a Friday, and you could buy it the following Friday because we self-published, right? With this, you had a partner. So it took some time, whether it's to develop the illustrations and then, of course, the animation. And that coming from entertainment, it takes a while to develop those characters. And when he read the book, he's like, Dad, this isn't true. And I said, well, what part? He goes, the story is about a boy named Zane who's on the search for free fun. And he goes, I know what free fun is. I don't have to search for it. And it was so funny because at 4 years old to 7, a different path for him in that growth. But then as he watched the animated version, I was so cool. I just sat back and watched him. And as a filmmaker, you could relate. Watching people watch your work is really enjoyable. And I watched him sit back, and every time he showed up on screen and the little kid went for a wave or he went on a bike ride or whatever it was in the animated film, he just smiled. and just smirked a little bit. And it really made my heart warm up, because I was like, I wonder what that is like to be 7 and see that on your big TV at home, and you're kind of moving along, and it was cool and it was cute. And the best part about it is that it became a tool for him to really improve and grow as a reader, which now, as I listen to him read books at night before bed, like, I could cry, because I know what it does to kids. And look, everybody's had their own challenging pandemic times. I'm not saying him not reading is, the hardest thing in the world. I mean, my mom came here at age 7, couldn't speak English. Same with my wife. They figured it out. He'll be fine.
Same with my mom.
Yeah.
She watched the 2 soap operas I worked on.
How about that?
That's why they were introduced to me. My mother learned to speak English. She moved to 21 years old.
Yeah, 21. How about that? Like, your brain is so more developed than a 7-year-old. But it's been a beautiful journey.
But he's going to someday introduce this to his children, which is, again, he's going to have that experience of watching them watch him.
Yeah, I hope so. I don't know. I was asking my wife that the other night after he watched it. I said, what do you think he's going to say about his childhood? Like, who knows, like, how he interprets it. It's just kind of fun to kind of predict, maybe, but I don't know. I really just want him to feel seen and heard. He would tell me, I'd say, hey, Zane, I'm going to go to school today, and you can volunteer for 20-minute windows here and there. And he goes, Dad, no, you can't. And I said, why? And he goes, you talk too much. All you do is talk all the time. So he's interpreting Dad as like a podcaster, broadcaster.
Yeah, I love that.
I know that for sure.
Dad's talking too much. That's funny. Filmmaking. How did you, coming from sports, make that transition? Were you always into film?
Yeah, great question. So when I was in college, I didn't have any confidence to jump into that path, but I always wanted to. I probably walked past your station at the Student Union in Pittsburgh and said, I wish I had the courage to go in there. I've always loved performance. I love acting. I love storytelling. I loved writing. It's always been a part of me. But I think as an athlete back 20 years ago, you were kind of told, like, no, you don't do that. And both of my siblings were actors and performers, so I kind of knew my lane. I was the jock.
Wow.
Yeah, they both are brilliant on the piano. They both can sing and dance and act. My brother's an actor, as you know. My sister was as well. Our mom was. But I kind of just leaned in the jock performance world, if you will. But I always wanted to play in their sandbox, per se. Never had the courage to do it. When I came out to LA, I wanted the LA experience. So I bought a surfboard. I lived on the beach. And I also went to acting classes every Tuesday night. I've never taken a broadcast class in my life. It was always acting, because I truly feel the most important skill in broadcasting is listening. Long story short, I wrote 2 books by the age of 26, and I was exhausted. And I was like, I don't want to write again. And I don't know who's reading, but I know a lot of people are watching. So I started to understand that I had access in the sports world. And I got to see, well, this is what they want to tell a story about this specific player, this team. I can get you in. I can speak sport. I can talk to the coach and the player, and you can teach me how to light a set, how to turn a camera on. You can teach me why you chose that music. And I can teach you how to navigate a locker room after a loss or after a win. I can tell you where the good shot is. And I just started growing from a PA to a field producer to a producer to now a director. And I just fell in love with the idea of story. And I go back to what I told Coach Carroll at 19, which is I want to impact the world in a really cool way. As a coach, I had 4 quarterbacks I coached. As a head coach, you have 105 players. If you're lucky, you're Pete Carroll and you can impact a city, a community, maybe a sport. But if you tell the right film or the right show, a la Ted Lasso, you can impact millions. And that's where I've really made that transition as a storyteller to fall in love with, now doing 20 plus films. And I hope to now really grow. Now I am in this next phase of my career in my 40s, where I feel my inner feng shui, my inner compass saying, yep, what story are we going to go tell next? I don't know which one it is, but I got a feeling it's going to be in the scripted world. I want to take a shot at that. I have a feeling in the doc space, it's going to be something that can be powerful. I feel my voice growing there. I've released 2 books over the last year, so I'm kind of just like keeping my plate clean. And all season, I've just journaled on my flights. What stories am I leaning into? Because filmmaking has always been a passion. Performing has always been one. And now with the experiences I have, I'm hoping that I can come up with the idea and the concept that is powerful.
I have no doubt that you will do that. I mean, I have not watched it, but I plan to. The award-winning film you did about your dad, Life in a Walk, and I did watch What It Means to Love, which I thought was absolutely beautiful. Um, but it's sort of going back to the beginning of where we started. At 8 years old, you were asking your grandparents this story, and when your dad was diagnosed with cancer, and you wanted to do something to make sure you asked all of the questions. I think it's so important to impart to anybody watching and anybody we both know that if you have that opportunity, ask and learn about your own family. I mean, what was that, what you learned in Life in a Walk? Did I say it right? Yeah, Life in a Walk. I mean, having that chance, the fact is you didn't wait too long.
Yeah. Well,
So many of us do.
Yeah, that was a jumping off point for the film. Is I can remember sitting in my home in Venice at the time, and I was thinking about my next adventure. I've always loved to travel by myself, a month or two at a time. Prior to meeting my wife, I would just go. Done it since I was 22. Peru and Machu Picchu was the first one, and then it was Israel, and then it was East Africa, and then it was Cuba, and then it was all over South America, and on and on and on. I've never stopped. That's a part of our life. This summer, our family with our kids did Europe for 3 weeks. Like it is
beautiful.
Everything that we're about, and we kind of grind through it, right? Like whether it's a hostel or a little pension or whatever it may be, wherever you are. But I think it's important to see the globe. And I think it allows you to see yourself. Well, as I was sitting home one night, it hit me like a ton of bricks that like my dad, who was diagnosed with prostate cancer when I was in college, I'd never dealt with it then, let alone ever. And I sat there, and for whatever reason, the vivid thought came through, which is, oh my God, I might learn more about him at the celebration of his life than in real life. And quite bluntly, I said, F that. And I said, okay, I'm flying home. And I flew home the next weekend. And I said, Dad, I'd like to go for a walk with you. My dad loves to walk. That's how he rehabbed himself from prostate cancer, was late night walks. It started as a quarter of a mile, then a half a mile, would get to 10 miles. And he would do it late at night because he would say the oxygen's super clean at night in Pennsylvania. Anyway, I said, let's go for a walk. And he said, sure, thinking it was around the block. And I gave him a plane ticket. And I said, no, we're going to go walk the Camino de Santiago in Portugal and Spain. We go to Madrid in 2 weeks. Can you meet me there? Here's your ticket. Of course, he said yes. And away we went. And I thought it would just be a home movie. I came home. The production team that I collaborated with on it said, hey, we looked at the footage. We don't think there's enough for a movie, but here it is. Do whatever you want. And I said, okay, cool. A year later, I mailed them the movie poster. And I said, we premiere next week. Thanks for at least giving me the resources to go do this trip. But we made a movie. And when we put the trailer online, I didn't know what it would do. And all of a sudden, bang, it went viral. And Men's Health picked it up. And when Men's Health picked it up, that was the moment that I said, this is a transcendent movie. Because many men struggle talking to their fathers, and many fathers struggle sharing with their sons, let alone mothers and daughters and parents and children, but specifically to men. And for my case, like men in an athletic home, it's like we're not allowed to cry unless we lost a game or won a game. But that's it. And I was of that ilk. And that walk with him, I truly believe, set in motion me having the vulnerability to meet my wife, to be the dad and husband that I hope to be, the creative and the artist that I hope to be, whatever. Every part of my life truly changed and pivoted from having the courage to say, hey, Dad, what was it like? And we went through every decade of his life. And when we got on the plane and the trip ended, I had this moment of journaling where I was just like, okay, if he is to pass away tomorrow, I'll be crushed, but at least I'll have gone out knowing I asked questions that I was curious about. And that, as I see it now, like that hit a lot of people between the eyes.
It really, I think, is the greatest lesson you can impart to any of us. Really, I wish, didn't have those opportunities. I think none of us think about that as kids. And I like to say today, when you having this platform, don't wait, because I've heard so many great stories like you're sharing that come from just asking those questions. Getting the opportunity. And if you've got the opportunity, do it. There's oh God, I won't remember. Tyler Oh, he produced a documentary about his family's Holocaust experience. Tyler Gilden. I can't think of the name of the documentary, but I will send it your way. Again, his father and their experiences, but he got to shoot his grandfather in his 90s and ask all those questions.
Wow.
Yeah,
I mean, I just think it's cool. Our oldest son is doing a project for his school now where he's got to tap into his culture. And it was really cool hearing him talk about his grandmother, who, my wife and her mom, they are 100% Korean. And he had to interview her last night. And it's kind of cool. Like, you don't know what's being embedded from a detail standpoint, right? Like, you don't know, maybe everything, maybe nothing. But I do think that he's developing his superpower of like, I can drop into different communities and be okay.
but also the interviewing.
Oh yeah, he talks too much. That's what I should tell him.
He's getting that from dad. Before I let you go, how has fatherhood changed your life?
In the most beautiful way that I couldn't imagine. I always knew it would be big time. I never discounted it. I never discounted the love that you would feel when a kid squeezes you or when they need you or when they break down. But it has made me less intense as a professional. I'll say this. The easy analogy is I think prior to having kids, I was the guy who plotted out his whole career. I'll do this, then this, then this, and then I'll be on Good Morning America, or boom, I'll be a lead in a film, or boom, I'll be this broadcaster. And once I had kids, especially after like the age of 1 or 2, where like it really gets to be a different type of experience, I flipped. And now in like the court of public opinion, for whatever that is worth, like if a 10 is GMA, I don't need to be a 10, right? I need to be a 10 as like dad, husband, present, there, drop off, pick up. I want them to know if pops, I want them to know that their dad showed up and also their dad worked his ass off and their dad was competitive and their dad followed his passion. But in the world of like what I think is trending on Deadline or whatever it may be, like it just fell off the table for me. To me, it's really became about form versus essence is a great phrase that a mentor shared with me. Form would be like the mic flag, ESPN, Fox, Pac-12, Amazon, Apple. Like I've worked at 3 of them, and maybe I'll work at the other 2 at some point. Like I'd be very proud to do so. But that's just the form of it. The essence is what I get to do every day, which is before this interview, I interviewed 2 student athletes at the University of Arizona. I interviewed the quarterback at Oregon and released an hour-long podcast on his story, nothing to do with football, all to do with his growth. Like the essence of getting to know humans. And I really believe this. My job is to seek and uncover humanity in sport around the globe and in the football season in the Pac-12 footprint. So that really changed and became solidified with kids of, like, what's your job? What's the essence of it? Are you doing it? And the whole glam of a mic flag or of a title, it's cool. I'm not discounting it, but it doesn't even register on a vision board that I have over my right shoulder. Like not even close. So that's probably been the biggest change. I think I've always been patient. So I think that's kind of been something fun to have, hopefully to teach my kids, but the not like being so outcome oriented on my career, but I'm just as I'm probably more productive now in my career, but I'm not obsessed around like the plan and the game plan. And I'm just here to do good work and tell good stories. And hopefully that leads to opportunities. And I've always asked
and you're absolutely making a difference.
Oh, thanks, man.
Making a difference. It's a pleasure, Yogi. Hopefully we'll meet in person someday. Thank you so much for spending the time.
Yeah, bro. Anytime. Thanks for having me and my brother. How about that? Now you just got to get our sister on, the whole family. Away you go, bro.
We'll do a family.
There it is. Love it. All right, bro.
You have a great afternoon.
Too.
Bye. Thanks, everybody, for watching today. Thank you, Yogi Roth. Please pick up Yogi's books, 5-Star QB and Finding Free Fun. Both are available on Amazon. Pick them up today. Please join me tomorrow when Yellowstone co-stars Jen Landon and Wendy Moniz join me live. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you like today's video, click the like button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow afternoon. Bye, everybody.